What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, and we're in double digits, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to week 10 of my weekly CFL football pick show for the 2024 CFL season and postseason. And coming out of a week 10 slate where we were even money, we were 6-6 in week 10. It was a very up and down week. Started kind of slow, kind of caught fire towards the end of the week. Somehow miraculously went 2 for 3 on the Calgary-Toronto game to close the week when it looked like I was going to get reverse swept. So it was a roller coaster of a week. But in those kinds of weeks, when you can come out the other side of it, even money or a little bit better, we'll take those. So 6-6, I'll take it. I was 2-2 straight up, 3-1 against the spread, which almost pulls my against the spread record back to even on the season. If I can do that again this week, I will be even Steven for the season as a whole. Gave it back on the totals, only got 1 of 4. So 6-6 means I'm 53-55. Still those 2 games, just under 500. Unfortunately, the story was all down in CFL Fantasy last week. Week 9, I only brought in 63.7 points. It was, I believe, my worst showing of the season in CFL Fantasy. And look, I had Vernon Adams at quarterback. He clearly played most of that game last week hurt. He's now out for probably multiple weeks. He got me virtually nothing. I had Justin McInnes. He only had 3 targets. He didn't catch any of them. So I got 0 there as well. Only 63.7 points. It was barely inside the top 1,400 across the whole game, and it was outside the top 350 in Derek Taylor's league, which just goes to show you just how competitive DT's league is, and I love it. On the season, 935.2, just barely inside the top 2,500 of the CFL fantasy game, basically through the midpoint of the season. I really need to pick up my heels here, and just inside the top 325 overall in Derek Taylor's league. But shout out to my most outstanding player, Winnipeg Blue Bombers wide receiver Ontario Wilson, who did throw up an 18.2 in week 9. I could have gone with James Butler, who I believe had 18. Walter Fletcher had a good week as well, but going to give it to Ontario Wilson there, just that little bit better, and a couple of nice breakout performances so far this year for Wilson. Our 4-game slate here in week 10 in the CFL looks like this. The Saskatchewan Roughriders travel to Ottawa to take on a REDBLACKS team coming out of their bye week, second bye week of the season in week 9. The Calgary Stampeders and the Toronto Argonauts rematch from last week, this time in Toronto. And the Hamilton Ticats and Montreal Alouettes also rematch from last week, this time shifting to La Belle Province. And we've got the BC Lions on the tail end of back-to-back road games, and likely without their starting quarterback, going to Edmonton to get the Trey Ford experience against the Elks. That's a really interesting game to talk about once we get to the betting lines. So, look, in terms of league-wide trends, there's almost none. Almost everything of significance is split in the CFL over the last, 30 days. Other than home and away. Home and away is still fairly, the home teams are still, winning a lot more than they're losing. But especially last week, home and away, I think, was 2-2. Favorites and dogs were 2-2. The over-unders were 2-2 to the over. So, again, other than home straight up, it's almost dead even across the last 30 days. So find the angle if you can. Unfortunately, we will not have my CFL fantasy roster in this episode. Of course, I guess based on how I did last week, maybe it's not all that unfortunate. But shout out to my good buddy Ryan Coop on Twitter. He kind of reminded me, because I was opining that the email had gone out that the week 10 lockout was lifted, but it wasn't. And then Coop kind of reminded me, hey, there was a holiday. That probably will delay things. So unfortunately, my fantasy roster will not be in this episode. I got a couple little tidbits here and there that we'll talk about, but that'll be about it for fantasy this week. Of course, you know where to look when it does come time to post that fantasy roster, but let's get started with our first game of the week this week, which is the Saskatchewan Roughriders in Ottawa taking on the REDBLACKS. Once again, the REDBLACKS coming into this game off of their bye. Saskatchewan, this is going to be their 6th consecutive game since getting their first bye of the season. So you got to wonder when fatigue is going to start to set in for that team. Maybe there was a little bit of that going on last week because an elite Riders defense feels the wrath of a Trey Ford offense as the Elks put up 528 total yards and 42 points on an elite, again, very good Saskatchewan Roughriders defense. The fourth quarter was, of course, particularly concerning where they gave up 22 points to the Elks. And the defensive side of that team unfortunately wasted what might have been Shea Patterson's best game as a pro at this level in the CFL. 336 all-purpose yards and 3 total touchdowns for Shea Patterson in that game. I think actually he was like the best fantasy quarterback in the league last week. And as a potential Trevor Harris return looms here for the Riders, Shea Patterson's not going to have that many more opportunities to have games like that. Just kind of sucked that the defense couldn't hold on. On Ottawa's side of things, the REDBLACKS are off of their second bye of the season, having won 3 straight games and 4 of their last 5. And in those 4 wins, Drew Brown has thrown for 1,307 yards. That includes, I believe, the 480-yard game that he had against Edmonton. And their only loss was the game against Winnipeg where Drew Brown got hurt. They're coming off of course, a 33-6 drubbing of the Stampeders back in Week 8. The REDBLACKS are still unbeaten in their own building this season, and that goes back to a win over the defending champion Montreal Alouettes back in the second week of the preseason. So, look, still unbeaten in Ottawa in 2024. I think it's important. They have wins over Montreal, Winnipeg, Hamilton, Edmonton, and Calgary at home, and their average margin of victory in those 5 games, including the preseason game, is +9. So they've outscored opponents by 45 points at home this year, which is not an insignificant number. Now, it's worth pointing out 27 of those 45 points came in the game they just played last week. So that does definitely skew those numbers a little bit. Excluding last week, their largest margin of victory is only +6. So these are all like 1 possession games, but the fact of the matter is all of those games have come up aces for the REDBLACKS. I do certainly expect that Shea Patterson will still be starting this week, even though Trevor Harris is practicing. And speaking of practicing again, the REDBLACKS getting a weapon back on their special team side. Devontae Dedmon is now practicing in full with the team, which sets up a really interesting dynamic in the return game with Devontae Dedmon on one side and Khalil Pimpleton on the other side. Which devil do you want to go with? Ottawa is 4-1 against the West Division this season. They're also, as I mentioned, unbeaten at home. I think I'm going to go ahead and lean on that. I actually really like the REDBLACKS in this spot. Give me Ottawa fresh off the bye. Again, playing a team that's going to be playing their 6th straight game. I really like that this week. Give me the REDBLACKS at home to get the win over the Riders. On the line, Ottawa laying a marginal -1.5 here as a very slim home favorite. I like him to win. It's a very small price to pay, so let's lay the -1.5 on the REDBLACKS. Total in this game set at 48.5 points. Look, it's 2 very good defenses who have played very good defense this year, and it's not like either one of these offenses are lightning in a bottle. You know what I mean? Like, none of them are super, super explosive. I like the under here. I think this is going to be a defensive, closely played battle like most of Ottawa's home games have been. Give me like a 24-21 final, which hits the under on that point total. So, REDBLACKS win straight up. I like the REDBLACKS -1.5 against the spread, and give me the under on the 48.5 point total. Let's go to Toronto now for that Stampeders Argonauts rematch from last week. Again, home and home here between Calgary and Toronto. Jake Maier orchestrating a 21-point comeback in the fourth quarter, capped off by a Demario Houston interception. Another big play from that Calgary secondary that's been doing that for most of the season in the dying seconds of the game. Calgary comes back and wins that game. I believe it was 27-24. On Toronto's side, Cameron Dukes dominated on the ground. He had 95 rushing yards on 12 carries and a rush touchdown, but it was the pass game that fell flat for the Argos one more time. And if you look at their last 3 games, every game they've played since the big offensive explosion against Montreal a few weeks back, their last 3 games, completing 66% of their passes, and this is as a team. So that's fine. But it's only 599 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 picks in 3 games. So if you're going to tell me that my quarterback is going to give me 66%, okay, 200 passing yards, and a 66% chance of a touchdown and a 66% chance of an interception, I'm going to be needing more from my pivot. Calgary's pass rush fires up 6 sacks on the Argos to kill key drives in that game, and there was multiple instances of key Argos drives getting killed by a sack on second down or a big play on third down, especially late in that game. All the more crucial as the Argos were already 3 for 3 in the red zone in that game. So like that's the difference right there. It's if you got Toronto in the red zone, they're going to put 7 on the board. They've shown that already through the game. So when you can kill some of those late drives with a great pass rush and a sack that really sets the offense back, it was a thing of beauty for the Stampeders last week. Rene Paredes, once again, a perfect 4 for 4 in the field goal game, added 2 extra points. Man, that's a situation where you definitely need your kicker to be perfect, and it's a good thing they've got him. This may seem kind of silly to talk about where Kadeem Carey is like the number 2 rusher in the entire CFL up to this point, but do the Argos have a Kadeem Carey problem? And the reason that I ask that is he's only topped 70 yards rushing twice. He's had 2 big splash games where he went for 90-something and 100-something. Other than that, he has not cracked 70. Just only those 2 games. He's got 4 rush touchdowns, which is definitely nice. But with the struggling in the pass game, again, that I just talked about for the Argos, he needs to be a dominant figure on that offense. And really, aside from those couple of games, he hasn't been. He has 3 games this season where he's up over 100 all-purpose yards. The problem is they've played 8. In saying that, the Jekyll and Hyde effect is really real for this Calgary Stampeders team. They are unbeaten at home. They have not won a game away from home yet this season. This is probably the last chance, you would think, for Cameron Dukes to keep the QB1 job. Because, look, we're at the point in the season now where Chad Kelly's going to be back, and assume that unless Cameron Dukes comes out and has some massive performance in a game like this, they're probably just going to hand the reins right back over to him, which on an on-field perspective, they probably should. But, you know, obviously there's everything else that goes with that conversation that I'm not going to get into here because this is a pick show. But this is probably Dukes' last chance. If he really wants to steal the QB1 job, this is likely his last go at it. I'm going to at least give him a shot at that. I like the Argos in this spot, actually, to avenge what happened last week. Once again, they're a good home team. Calgary has been an abysmal team on the road this season. I think this is a great bounce back spot for the Argos. And this is a matchup of 2 teams that have been waiting a long time to get their next bye week. Toronto has not had a bye since week 2. Calgary, I don't think, has had a bye since week 3. So this is going to be Toronto's 8th straight game. It's going to be Calgary's 7th straight game. These are 2 tired teams, but I think Toronto's going to be ticked off enough based on what just happened last week. I like them a lot in this spot. Let's take the Argos at home to beat the Stamps. On the line, Toronto's only laying -1 here as, again, a very marginal home favorite. I like that a lot. Let's lay the -1 on the Argos. Total in the game set at 49.5 points. I think this is going over this week. I expect, again, a lot of fireworks probably later in the game, but I really expect Toronto to flex some offensive muscle in this one. Let's go over the 49.5 point total, and I'm going to go like 33-20. 2 possession win, very comfortable win here for the Argos. Again, I think this is a bit of a revenge game here based on really letting it slip away last week in the second half. I think they make good on that and get a big win here. So Argos win, Argos cover the -1 and give me the over on the 49.5 point total. The other home-and-home rematch this week sees the Hamilton Ticats travel to Montreal to take on the Argonauts, and the second half woes continued for the Ticats last week as the Alouettes go on a 23-9 run after halftime, and they pick up a pretty comfortable win. James Butler puts up 110 all-purpose yards on 19 touches, which is the yardage and the involvement that we like to see from him, but the Ticats were held to just a single Tim White touchdown on the offensive side and a pick 6. The one interception that Davis Alexander threw went back to the house. So I ain't going to take that pick 6 away from them. But other than that, the game wasn't all that close. On the Ticats side, some noteworthy achievements from that game last week. Bo Levi Mitchell overtaking Vernon Adams for the league passing lead. Now has 2,497 yards passing through week 9. And he also eclipsed 36,000 passing yards for his career, which obviously are two pretty big achievements here. And since it looks like Vernon Adams is going to be out for a few weeks, Bo Levi Mitchell's really in the driver's seat here to keep that passing lead and extend it over the next few weeks. Bo is on pace for his best season since his most outstanding player days. We're talking 2018, 2019, half a decade ago. He's on pace for a really excellent season, which just underscores that when you're talking about Hamilton, it's not on the offense. It is not their fault that this team is 2-6. On Montreal side of things, Cody Fajardo did practice last week, but obviously did not dress for this game. Davis Alexander got the start with Caleb Evans in behind him, and unfortunately, Caleb Evans scored 2 touchdowns last week, which was great, but he's unfortunately done for the season now with a knee injury. They just announced that earlier today. The Alouettes did sign Dominique Davis to step into that role, and obviously Davis knows this offense very well, knows the fans, knows the team, knows the culture. That's a really good signing for them. So their offense probably stays about similar. I really liked what they're able to do with Caleb Evans in that role. Obviously, he's not the starting quarterback that I tried to crown him as a few seasons ago. But that's his wheelhouse, is doing exactly what the Alouettes had him doing last week. Touched the ball 3 or 4 times. He turned it into 40 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's the dynamic weapon that a guy like Caleb Evans is, and a guy like Dominique Davis is capable of being as well. But Davis Alexander gets the start last week. He manages that game against a really soft Ticats defense that he'll get to face ideally again this week. 262 yards passing, I believe, for Alexander. He had a touchdown and he had a pick. Walter Fletcher, also worth mentioning, 84 all-purpose yards and a rush touchdown. The season is starting to slip away in Hamilton, and the Ticats need this game way more than the Alouettes do. Even if Montreal doesn't win this game, they're still sitting pretty in the East Division playoff picture. The Ticats need this game way, way more, but I genuinely believe that the formula and the system that's run by the Alouettes is run at such a high level that it's just one that I don't think the Ticats are capable of matching, even if it is all hands on deck, even if things do go well. How in the world can you trust that team in the second half of a football game? You simply cannot. So I'm going to go with the Alouettes here yet again. Let's take Montreal at home to get the win over the Ticats. Now, Montreal is laying the most points of any team by a lot this week. They're laying -7.5 here at home, which is a number that I don't love, even though they obviously would have covered this number just last week. And they're getting ideally a better situation because now they get to go home. I guess I'm going to kind of have to and lay it. It just seems like a lot of points to lay in this spot, but you got to consider the opposition, I suppose. Let's go ahead and lay the -7.5, at least a little bit uncomfortably, on the Alouettes. Total in this game set at 50.5 points. I think this is an under. I mean, look, 14 points from the game last week came off of Caleb Evans, right? So, I don't necessarily see that happening immediately with Dominique Davis, and I think that does wind up lowering the score here a little bit, enough that we're going to hit an under in this one. We're going to stay under the 50.5 point total in Hamilton, Montreal. I'm going to go 28-17 for the Alouettes, which means they win. They cover the -7.5, and the under hits on the 50.5 point total. And the last game we're going to look at is the BC Lions on the tail end of back-to-back road games, taking on Trey Ford and the Edmonton Elks. Now, the Elks do come into this game. This will be their 5th consecutive game since they had a bye week. So fatigue, you can kind of look at, might be starting to set in a little bit on that team. It's at the very least something to watch out for. But, I mean, the whole team's been rejuvenated, right? The whole team has been rejuvenated here by the emergence and the opportunity finally to emerge for Trey Ford. But on BC's side of things, the Lions get shell-shocked last week on the field, a shutout loss against the Blue Bombers, 25-0, and obviously lose even more on the depth chart as Vernon Adams goes down to a knee injury in that shutout loss in Winnipeg. Probably the most putrid offensive game I've seen all season long. If you're the Lions offensive coordinator, burn the game tape on this one, and if you're a Lions fan, you may want to look away. 129 total yards of offense. 2 for 15 on second down. What is that? 12%? Something like that? 0 visits to the red zone. They were not in the red zone one time all game long on offense. Punted the ball 9 times. 18 minutes of possession in a 60-minute game. I'm not going to say anymore. But hey, at least Keon Hatcher came back. He only caught 3 balls for 28 yards, but he is back. On Edmonton's side of things, this is what we waited for. This is what we waited for, ladies and gentlemen. Trey Ford is real, and he is fantastic. Trey Ford with 298 all-purpose yards, 2 passing touchdowns. He did throw a pick. He's an imperfect quarterback, as everyone is. Javon Leake as well, 15 touches, 195 all-purpose yards, and a hat trick of rushing touchdowns, outgunning a top defense in this league for their first win of 2024. I'm not an Elks fan. Like, I don't live in Edmonton. I don't have a direct connection to the team other than people that I know who live out there. But it's a cathartic feeling to be proven right. Obviously, everything is not all sunshine and rainbows for Edmonton. The Elks defense still holds them down to a certain level in terms of their week-to-week viability to win football games. That's still a very not good defense. But a fundamentally different offense, which is what I've been talking about for weeks. Trey Ford completely changes the game for the Elks on the offensive side. And we saw that last week. The fundamentally different offense will take time for teams to catch up to and figure out what they're doing and how to defend against it. And Trey Ford and company can beat anybody with offensive games like that. We assume that Dolegala is the quarterback. And with Dolegala as the quarterback, even though this is a very prolific offensive team, what's the upside here on the scoreboard with Jake Dolegala? The best games I've ever seen him have, he's had like 3 touchdowns. Okay, he's not really a threat to run the ball. In fact, Vernon's more of a threat to run the ball than Dolegala is. So what do we say the offensive upside is here? Like 24 points? Something like, is that being unfair? I don't think so. I'll take Trey Ford to go over 24 on the team total every day of the week and twice on Sundays. Ladies and gentlemen, I love the Edmonton Elks in this spot to get their first win at home since, I don't know, Jimmy Carter was president. Like, it's been a long time since that team has won a game at home. I think they do it this week. Gimme the Elks at home to beat the BC Lions. Now, the spread and the total, really, really interesting in this game because they opened at BC laying -5.5 as a road favorite, a really heavy road favorite too. Then, of course, the news of Vernon Adams' injury comes out. The total opened at 54 in this game. So all the books pulled that down immediately. And it has come back up, and Edmonton is now a 1-point favorite. Edmonton now a 1-point favorite at -1. The total has dropped all the way down to 49.5. So I like Edmonton to win. Give me the -1. That's 3 games this week. 3 games where the books have set the line against the spread at like -1. Total in the game, 49.5. That's every total this week too, between like 48.5 and 50.5. So it's again, like they're throwing their hands up and saying, we don't know what to do. So we're just going to make everything basically the same. Anyway, 49.5, I still like the prospects of this going over. If the Lions hit their like 24-point cap that I've kind of handicapped them on with Jake Dolegala, which I think is fair, and I think is likely that they do hit it, I think Edmonton gets into the 30s here without much of a problem. So 49.5, I'm comfortable taking the over in this one for sure. Let's go 34-24 in favor of Treyford and the Elks. Elks win, Elks cover the -1, and give me the over on the 49.5 point total. There you go, folks. That is the show for this week. I'll go over the picks here with you very quickly one more time, and then we'll get you out of here. I got the Ottawa REDBLACKS beating the Saskatchewan Roughriders 24-21, laying the -1.5 on Ottawa in a game that stays under 48.5 points. I got the Toronto Argos beating the Calgary Stampeders 33-20, laying the -1 on the Argos over the 49.5 point total. I got the Montreal Alouettes beating the Hamilton Ticats 28-17, laying the -7.5, although doing that a little bit, and staying under the 50.5 point total. And I got the Edmonton Elks beating the BC Lions 34-24, laying -1 on the Elks and going over the 49.5 point total. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter. Enjoy the games in Week 10. Hopefully the audio and video are a little bit better on this episode than they were last week. I figured out what happened, so hopefully that's been fixed. Enjoy the games. We'll see you again in Week 11.